Hello and welcome to a brief presentation where we'll be looking at the do's and don'ts of creating a stacked text project. Before we move on to the demonstration, let's take a look at what we'll be covering in this presentation. We'll be taking a look at a simple stacked text example as shown here on the right hand side, which is the Vectric User Group 2018 badge. As you can see, it looks fairly complicated with its sort of multi-layers of text, but actually if we follow some core principles and a series of steps, it proves to be a very simple project to create. We'll also be taking a look at how to productionize the process in terms of how we can make changes but minimize the number of processes and our calculation time, and how we can scale up from a single part to produce multiple parts. Stacked text projects can also be called text on text. And before we start the demonstration, let's take a look at some examples. All these examples share the fact that we have one layer of text above another. They all tend to look quite complicated, but actually if we follow some core principles and steps, prove to be very easy to create. So let's take a look at some of those core principles we need to apply. Number one is to use levels. Work in a structured fashion so you don't get yourself in a mess. Make safe copies of the original vectors and text, as you'll be merging these later in the process to create the text for the bottom layer. Separate the job into top and bottom text. The whole project becomes a lot simpler if you think about it as two levels. And be careful when merging the text when creating the vectors for the bottom section. Don't merge the text. Merge the group vectors and you'll get the result you require. The next stage is to apply these core principles in a project of our own. So I'm going to go ahead and start a new session of vCarve Pro 9.5, create a new file. In this case it's a single-sided job, width 6, height 4, thickness 0.15. Our Z0 will be from the material surface and our XY datum is in the center. I now need to start building my vectors for my text, so I'm going to go straight across to the draw text command and just locate roughly in the middle there where I want the text to be, and in this case it's going to be Vectric User Group. Okay, and I'm just going to close that form down and just center that in the middle of the workpiece. And the next stage is to actually create a rectangle, because what we're going to do is to have text in a box. So I'm just going to go and create my vector now, and in this case it will be centered at 0, 0, and the width is going to be 4 inches and my height is going to be 1.5. So we have that rectangular vector in the center there. I'm now going to select that vector, go across to my draw text within a vector box, and go straight ahead with my what will be 2018. And as you can see here, I'm going to just make sure there is no margin size, and just to make sure I'm just going to stretch the characters to make sure it fills the vector all together, and close that. And of course at that stage now I can delete that box and still come in and change my text if required. Now I'm just going to rotate this text, the 2018 text, a little. So I'm just going to select that now, come into the rotation command and just give this an angle of 12.5 where the center of rotation is in the center of the workpiece. So 12.5, and apply that. So now we have basically our vectors that will form our top and bottom. Now what I'm going to do before I do anything is actually to save these onto some safe levels. So I'm going to select my Vectric User Group there and move that to a layer, new layer, and this will be called bottom text safe. Okay, and OK that, and then take our 2018 and move to layer, new layer, top text safe. So now I've got the safe copies there, I can start to create the required text for our upper and lower levels. So I'm going to take the 2018 now and copy that text to a new layer, and this will be called top text. And I'm going to take the bottom layer and copy that to layer bottom text. But of course the bottom text, or the vectors that we're going to use before we actually pocket out the bottom level, needs to have both a combination of the 2018 text and the Vectric User Group text in order to be able to add on the 2018 on top of that. So really what we need to do is also copy our 2018 vectors to the bottom layer. So I'm going to copy that layer to bottom text as well. So if I now come back up to the layers, I can delete that layer 1, we don't need that anymore. I'm going to switch off all my layers now, okay, and we can see our bottom text, which happens to be both the 2018 and the Vectric User Group, and our top text is purely the 2018. Okay, the next stage for us is to create the vectors for the bottom layer. So I'm going to switch off the top text, switch on the bottom text, and make that the active layer. What we have on the screen here is two sets of vectors. So we have the Vectric User Group and the 2018. And what we need to do is to bring these together, merge them together in order to create the required vector that we'll need for machining the bottom layer. So how would I merge these two together? They're currently text, so I might think about selecting all of those now and welding them together. So if I weld them together, I get this message. I'm just going to convert those the text to curves and say yes, and then go ahead and reselect and then merge those vectors. But of course we do not get exactly what we want. We're missing all the islands that have been basically trimmed away. So I'm actually going to undo this. So I'm going to undo, which will convert it back into vectors, and then undo, which will convert it back to the text. So we've got the text as we started. Now a key to the correct merging is to not try and merge simply a set of vectors or curves, but to actually merge two groups of vectors. So I'm going to first of all convert these to curves and then regroup. So on the left hand side I'm going to group that together and do the same with the Vectric User Group text. So right mouse key, convert to curves, and whilst that's selected, come across and group that together. Now if I select those two and weld, we get exactly what we want. So that now formulates the correct vectors for the bottom layer. Okay, before we can create any toolpaths, we're going to need to think about the borders for the inner and outer. And this is an offset of the Vectric 2018 User Group text. So whilst that's selected, I'll go down to my offset command and I'm going to offset outwards. Now I know I need to be 0.2 outwards, so I'm going to go 0.2 inches outwards and offset. But as you can see, two things here. One is obviously we have some islands left in the middle, and also we have some quite sharp edges, so not a particularly organic shape. So I'm going to undo this now, and we are going to offset. So rather than going 0.2, I'm going to over offset by ½ an inch and then bring it back inwards to create my inner and outer borders. So I'm going to go 0.5 outwards. So as you can see, that's way larger, and I'm going to reselect that one now and just say select new and delete original, and we're going to come inwards initially by 0.1, which will be for the outer border. Okay, and as you can see there, we've got some nice internal rounds on that vector, so a nice organic shape. And then I'm going to go a further 0.2. Okay, so I don't need to delete the original, and I'm going to offset that. And now we have basically our inner and outer borders. So I'm just going to close that now, and we are now going to copy these onto new levels because they're currently on the bottom text level. So I'm going to move to layer, and this is going to be new layer, and it's going to be inner border, and the outer one, move to layer, new layer, outer border. Okay, before we go ahead and create any toolpaths, let's take a look at what vectors are on what layers. So I'm just going to switch off all the layers first, and then we've got our bottom text safe, which is our Vectric User Group. our top text safe, which is the 2018. Similarly, the 2018 is on our top text layer, and our bottom text happens to be a combination of the Vectric User Group and 2018 merged together, and our inner border and our outer border. Now we're going to start by creating the toolpaths for our sort of top level or top text. So with that, I need to have the inner border and the top text shown. And I'm now going to come across to machining and going to select all those vectors that we have on the screen, and we need a pocket between those two. So into the pocket toolpath, my start depth is going to be 0 at the top of the workpiece, and I'm cutting down to a depth of 50,000th. I'm going to be using a larger and a smaller tool. An offset strategy. Once again, please pick the applicable parameters based upon your machine and the material and your tooling that you're using. This is purely an example, and I'm going to specify this as the top layer. So we're going to cut this first and calculate. So with that now, I'm just going to give these a different color. So I'm going to give them a nice orange color because we're going to pick a different one for the bottom, and I'm going to preview all those toolpaths there. So we've cut the top layer now, or the top text. Now we need to sort of cut what would be the underlying text. So with that, I'm going to come back now to our 2D view, and I'm going to switch off my top text, switch on the bottom text, but obviously keep the inner border shown, and come back to our machining, select all those vectors, and go back into the pocket toolpath command, and the only thing I need to change here is a start depth. So our start depth is basically the base of the toolpath that we created for the top, which is 50,000th, and now I'm going to go down and cut by a further 50,000th. Exactly the same parameters, and I'm just going to specify that as bottom, and we're going to calculate. So with that, I'm now going to just change the color of the bottom toolpaths to be a yellow color, and I'm going to simulate preview visible toolpaths, and there we have what looks to be quite complicated was actually a very simple process of creating the vectors for the top and bottom layers, and then basically a pocket toolpath for each of those two different layers. So with that now, I now need to finish this off by creating the cutout pass. Okay, so let's go back to our 2D view now, and we can actually switch off our bottom text and inner border, switch on our outer border, go back to our toolpathing menu, and in this case we're going to select the vector and do a profile toolpath. We're going to have a start depth at the top of our material, 0, down to a cut depth of just past the material thickness, 0.16 inches, and we're going to be using our 0.125 inch end mill, and we're going to be cutting outside the vectors, and this is going to be called cutout. And calculate. So it's going to warn me that I'm cutting through the material, but that's fine. We're going to preview that toolpath now and just get rid of the material, and there we can see our completed badge. Okay, before we take a look at how to productionize the process, let's have a little bit of a recap of the steps that we took to create this job. So, step 1, keep safe copies. We created the text, and then we copy the top text to top text safe and the bottom text to bottom text safe. Separate the job into bottom and top sections. So I created 2 new layers, and we created the top text, which was just the 2018, and the bottom text happened to be a copy of the 2018 and the Vectric User Group. We then created the correct text layout for the bottom section. We had to make sure that we merged the 2018 and the Vectric User Group together in order to create the required vectors for the toolpathing. And then we went ahead and created the toolpath for the top layer with a cut depth with the for the depth of the top text, and exactly the same toolpath ready for the bottom layer. The only thing that we needed to do was to modify the start depth but keep the same cut depth, as the bottom text was the same depth as the top. So with that now, we're now going to move on to look at how we can make changes to the design quickly, which really looks at how we can productionize this. So to do that, we need to use levels. Okay, have a set naming structure, which we've already adopted. And if we're going to be importing data, make sure the imported data levels happen to match the levels that we've got within our workpiece. And use the vector selector to associate the vectors to toolpaths. Now, on the bottom of the Pocket Toolpath form, you'll see the vector selection, which was normally manual. We're going to go to the selector and be able to pick the closed vectors that happen to fall on particular levels, and then associate the toolpath with those. So if we do modify the vectors on that layer, then they will be automatically updated. And the change in the design can be as easy as just 2 steps. One, to re-import or recreate the new vectors, and then just to straight recalculate the toolpaths. So let's take a look in the software. Now, if we were to make any modifications to the vectors, we would have to manually reselect them and recalculate each toolpath, whereas we can make this work a lot easier by using the vector selector. So what I'm going to do now is just make sure that the vectors are switched on. So I'm going to make sure our 4 levels with the vectors are switched on, and then come back to our top toolpath, which was the first one we created. Come down to the vector selection process at the bottom and hit the selector. And I'm going to go all closed vectors, and I'm going to use the inner border, okay, and our top text, which were the 2 items that need to be displayed for the original toolpath, and make sure that we select the associate with toolpath. So I'm going to close that now and recalculate, and then do the same for the bottom. So I'm going to come back into the selector, and in this case it's going to be inner border and bottom text and associate with toolpath. Close that one now and calculate. And finally the cutout, which I'm going to come down and use just the outer border, associate with toolpath, and OK, and calculate. And that's going to warn me, and I'm going to recalculate. So I'm just going to reset the preview now and make sure that everything did calculate OK. So reset that preview and preview all toolpaths, and we'll just check that everything recalculated fine. And there we have, perfectly done, and we've set that up now. Now if I make any changes or import new text, then obviously I can just recalculate the toolpaths, and that will be updated. Now that's what we're going to do here. Actually, what I've done is I've created a new DXF file for Vectric User Group 2019. So with that, I'm just going to come back to my 2D view now and essentially delete all of the vectors that we see on the screen here now. So I'm going to delete those out, okay, and we can see that we do have the top text safe and bottom text safe, and of course I can, if I wanted to, make those changes with that. So if I actually switch off the bottom text and come back into the drawing menu, so if we swap across, take that now and come into the text, you'll notice that I will be able to edit the text. So I can just simply come back in 2019, and it keeps the orientation without being reset, which was a problem that we had with previous versions. So, but anyway, I'm going to switch that off now, and we are going to import a new set of data. So I'm going to go to File, Import, and this is going to be a DXF file. So we've got our 29 DXF, okay. Now that happens to be set up with the same level naming. So I'm going to switch that in, and you can see here that we've got one level here with no data, which I can delete. But if we go in there and take a closer look now, so I'm going to switch them all off. We've got our outer border, because that needed to be recalculated because it's an offset of 2019 and not 2018. We've got our outer border, inner border, we've got our top text, and we've got our bottom text. Okay, so with that now, I can come across to my toolpaths, okay, and simply recalculate all toolpaths. So I'm going to recalculate all of them now, okay, and that's perfect. Toolpaths recalculated successfully. I'm going to reset my preview now, so reset the preview. So if you notice here, we've got 2018, reset that preview, and then preview all toolpaths. And we've created a new badge for 2019. So this was where I took a DXF file with new vectors on, same layer structure, imported that data and simply recalculated all the toolpaths because I'd set up the vector selector to machine any vectors, no matter what they are, on that particular layer using that strategy. So as the vectors changed, all I needed to do was recalculate. So with that, thank you very much.